Welcome to the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum Zoom series, Trolleyology. My name is Kristen Fredrickson. I'm the Assistant Manager of Visitor Experience here at the Trolley Museum. Thank you guys so much for joining us today, and welcome back to all of you who have joined us before. This virtual series features programs on Pennsylvania transit history topics or stories of the trolley era and our collection or nearby transit systems as well that you can experience from the comfort of your home. And fingers crossed, we're going to continue these programs regularly. So if you have a show that you would like to share something about Pennsylvania or Ohio, nearby the trolley era, cities where our streetcars come from, or a program that maybe doesn't quite fit those lines, that's okay too. Please reach out to me. I'll put my email address in the chat, or you can also get it from your confirmation email that you received tonight. Please, please, please reach out because we've only got stuff scheduled through January of 2023, and we want to keep these going because I know people like coming out to these. You can see the full list of upcoming programs on our website, patrolley.org, which I will share in the chat in just a few minutes here. And I wanted to extend a very, very special thank you to those of you who donated during the registration process for tonight's program, and to those of you who have donated through our website. We really, really appreciate your support of our virtual outreach programs and of the museum. And most of you probably know all about the museum already, but for those who might not have been here before, we were established in 1954 as the Arden Electric Railway by a group of trolley enthusiasts called the Pittsburgh Electric Railway Club. And the museum opened to visitors a few years later in 1963 and is actually located along the route of the trolley line between Pittsburgh and Washington, PA. You'll find about 50 trolleys and electric railway cars here, almost 20, a couple dozen of which operate, and about 30,000 visitors per year take the 4-mile scenic ride here at the museum. And very, very exciting this week, some updates from our new Welcome and Education Center. We have a floor going in, which is very exciting, especially because that's something that we were really hoping they would get done before winter. So there you'll see the floor going in on the left. Reminder, this is our 21,000 square foot Welcome and Education Center that we hope will open sometime next year. And Trolley Street on the right is finally getting paved with brick, which is super exciting. It's going to bring everything over there together. It's going to look beautiful. And that started last week as well. So work is progressing over at our East Campus. And stay tuned to these Trolleyology programs and our website and social media for all of the updates with our Welcome and Education Center. All right, so now I want to introduce today's presenter, Bill Van Doren. Bill is a retired assembly engineer who was introduced to traction by a small trolley layout featured in the April 1954 model railroader, which he still has. Then followed listening to relatives talk about the interurban era and searching out rights of way during their travels, and the great experience of knowing Rich Wagner. A high school term paper on the Cincinnati and Columbus Traction Company got way out of control, ended up 30 pages long, and taught him lifelong research skills. Traction was put on hold, and Bill's children were growing up, but his interest achieved new life when they left. And Bill's wife expected to see miniature trolley cars running all over the house, but instead has learned to deal with a huge photo collection, library, and street railway journal set. Bill has been privileged to ride many of the world's tramways with Cincinnati rail fans, the German VDVA Traction History Group, and occasionally in connection with employment. His primary interest is in traction history, particularly in the Western Ohio area. All right, and at the end of the presentation, we will have a question and answer session with Bill, but the chat box will be open throughout the program, so please feel free to enter questions and comments during the show, and we can read through those at the end. And just a note, this program is being recorded, and it will be shared on our YouTube at a later date. I have a couple of those that I need to work on, but yes, we will be sharing this on YouTube along with most of our programs. So please keep your microphones muted and your videos turned off during the presentation so that we don't have any distractions. And I will invite everybody to turn them on again at the end. All right, Bill, if you're ready, you can take it away and hit that green share screen button.
Okay, share screen. We'll stop other sharing. Okay, yes. And
screen
here we
two.
Go. There we go. Now, are you on, Kristen?
Yes, we're seeing it. Perfect.
Okay. Well, tonight, and you can hear me too, yes?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, tonight we're going to talk about the Ohio Electric Railway Company. Now, excuse me, that was a 617-mile system that ran from Zanesville, Ohio to Richmond, Indiana. It ran from Cincinnati to Toledo, from Lima to Fort Wayne. There were minor lines, branches from Lima to Defiance and from Dayton to Union City, Indiana. They ran there were multiple other short branches and feeders along the way that we'll talk about as we encounter them. They ran the streetcars in 7 cities: Zanesville, Newark, Hamilton, and Lima. In Dayton, they ran a lengthy streetcar line down to a wealthy southern suburb, which actually lasted under other owners until 1940. In Springfield, they ran one streetcar on the interurban tracks from the east city limits to the Masonic home west of town. In Bellefontaine, in Ohio, yes, that's pronounced Bellefontaine, no matter what the French may say. They ran one streetcar on 2 routes, north and south on the interurban tracks, east and west, from the huge New York Central shops west of town to the east city limits. Now we're going to start with a slideshow. Don't panic, don't zone out. All it really says is that Ohio Electric was a project of the Randall Morgan Syndicate of Ohio and Indiana. In Ohio, the point man was William Kesley Schiff. They controlled Ohio Electric Railway, and they controlled something called the Ohio Traction Company, which in turn controlled the Cincinnati Street Railway, the Millcreek Valley Street Railway, which was a 16-mile broad gauge interurban from the Cincinnati Zoo up to Hamilton, never a competitor, 2 miles east or so, and parallel to Ohio Electric, the kind of thing you hang on to so nobody gets a hold of it and gives you competition. They also controlled the Cincinnati Car Company, the Cincinnati Zoo, and Chester Park, the major amusement park down here. Now, the way they put it together, they purchased outright the Lima Toledo segment before it was completed. They finished it with their own money, their own borrowed money. It was the only thing that Ohio Electric actually owned. Everything else was leased. Now, over the years, they were incorporated in 1907. They suffered serious financial losses from the Great Midwest floods in 1913, $1.5 million worth of damage. That's $45 million today, uninsured. They never paid a dividend. They were dissolved in 1921. Now, over the 14 years that they operated as a corporation, Ohio Electric, as we think of it, only existed. It did not reach Lima until spring of 1908. They didn't get to Toledo until the fall of 1908. In 1918, the segment from Cincinnati to Dayton, the cash cow of the system, was lost because they were not paying interest. The segment from Dayton to Richmond was lost in 1920 for the same reason. So Ohio Electric, as we think of it normally, only lasted from late 1908 until 1918. Now, as I started to say earlier, everything was leased. The 2 exceptions were the system, the line from Dayton to Richmond. They never owned a share of stock. The line from Cincinnati to Dayton, they had a substantial common stock interest, but they never controlled the voting stock. They didn't pay the rent, and in 1916 they surrendered that stock. In 1918, the conservative Cincinnati burghers abrogated their lease. Now let's go for a ride. We're going to start on the Cincinnati to Dayton segment. Now we will start at the terminal, the Cincinnati station, It was located in then suburban Cumminsville, 6 miles from downtown. Ohio Electric never did get downtown. It always transferred its passengers to the streetcars here. Cincinnati is geographically challenged. The heart of the city is right on the banks of the Ohio River, which prohibited growth to the south. Growth to the north was prohibited by a semicircle of high bluffs, which completely surrounded the northern part of the city. Everybody, the 7th largest city in the country, formed the most crowded urban area west of New York City because everybody lived down in the bottoms. There were only about 4 natural ravines, ways, and means of access to the downtown. The street railway controlled them all. In fact, the street railway had a lockhold through its franchise and political connections on all of the streets of the city. That was their philosophy, was that the interurbans could stop at the city limits and transfer their passengers to the city streetcars, and that's just how it was going to be. It was not the broad gauge track of Cincinnati that's blocked the interurbans. They did have 3-rail track. They did have a couple of broad gauge interurbans that did struggle with access. It was not the 2-wire overhead. The streetcars would operate. The rails were grounded. They would operate on 1 wire, and 1 interurban did. And in fact, Cincinnati did have 3-rail track eventually. Columbus, Ohio had a huge section of 3-rail track in the north of town. The blockage was pure and simple the street railway greed, which with Schiff, that was okay, because remember from the eye chart, he had his fingers in both companies. Now, if you knock down the back wall of the train shed here and extend the tracks 200 yards due east, just straight east, you will come to the Miami and Erie Canal. That's where the city of Cincinnati ultimately built its subway, never operated it, but it built it. It was sold to the people as not as an urban transit system, but as a way to end run the street railway, lock hold on the streets, and allow the interurbans downtown. The construction started after, that was before the war. Construction started after the war. It was hit by post-war inflation, the decline of the interurbans, the opposition of the street railway, and an incredibly corrupt municipal regime, which was voted out of office. The new powers that be immediately canceled the subway, thinking that when the stench died down and the corruption was forgotten, they would resurrect it as an urban transit vehicle. And if the interurbans wanted to use it, well, that was fine. Well, along came the Depression, then the war, then the automobile, and it never was completed. Now, we do need to talk just a minute about the canal. It ran from downtown Cincinnati, actually all the way to Toledo, but the Pomeroy Mandelbaum Syndicate, Cleveland Southwestern, West Ohio, Chicago, Aurora, and Elgin, they lusted after a lake to the river interurban system, and one of their projects was something called the Miami and Erie Canal Transportation Company. They actually built track on the berm of the canal from Dayton all the way to downtown Cincinnati. They strung overhead and built a partial electrical distribution system. The stated objective, which nobody really believed, was to tow canal boats with electric mules. Think Panama Canal. It was a technical disaster and absolute failure. But here they had a low-grade, water level, electrified track from Dayton all the way to downtown Cincinnati in competition with the forming Ohio Electric and the street railway. Well, they got in trouble in 1903. In order to save the maiden stem, they let this fall into bankruptcy. Schiff came in as the trustee in bankruptcy and immediately abandoned it. Well, think Ohio Electric, real competitor. Think access to downtown, another competitive threat. Now, going north from Cincinnati, the first segment was actually built by a narrow gauge steam railroad, 11 miles long, the Cincinnati and Northwestern. in 1876. In 1878, they got a franchise to operate downtown on the berm of the canal. But the fools never exercised it and let it expire. In 1888, it was standard gauged, and in 1901, and his buildup to Ohio Electric, Schiff was acquiring properties sometimes in his own name. He got control of this. He electrified it with this home-built electric locomotive. Now, from Cumminsville up to the was a long twisting hill, very steep, up here to this is called College Hill. Here comes the interurban, the Cincinnati Northwestern up the hill, crosses, this is Hamilton Avenue, goes about a half mile west and then 3 miles north. This was, in electric days, never carried passengers. Ultimately, that became the Cincinnati and Lake Erie Freight Line. Whole another issue. Now, the street railway out here. Now, the original terminal of Ohio Electric was up here on the north side of this community of College Hill at the city limits. To connect the end of his line with the line going down to Cumminsville, the street railway had a big loop, rural loop out here, which returned to the city southbound in Hamilton Avenue. Schiff built a single track northbound in Hamilton Avenue, half-mile long, and ran interurbans both directions on his single track. That was a problem when in the day it existed that way until 1924. You can imagine the headaches then. At that point, Conway rearranged things, and the interurban then came south on its own track in the southbound lanes. The street railway and the interurban shared a 3-rail track northbound in Hamilton Avenue. They shared a 2-wire overhead. The streetcars used both wires and the interurban used only one. It was not, as we said, the physical problems that kept the interurbans out of Cincinnati. It was the greed of the street railway. Now, north of Cincinnati, out into the country, southern Ohio is rolling, not like Pennsylvania, but it can be rough down here. The interurban to Dayton was built between 1896 and 1898. It was a typical side of the road trolley line. It followed the hills and dales and the curves of the road. We see them coming here around a sharp curve, sending a really steep grade in 1901 down into a place called Sims, where there was a DC power station and a car barn. That's Hamilton Avenue over there on the far left. Now, in Hamilton, in order to guarantee access to the city streets, Schiff gained control of the Hamilton streetcars. Technically, the Hamilton and Lindenwold Transit Company, a major streetcar system which lasted into the 30s under different owners. Now, south of town, from downtown down about 2 miles to a place called Lindenwold, this was his inspiration, I suppose, for College Hill. The streetcars ran on the northbound, on the berm of the northbound Hamilton Avenue, single track, both directions, impinged upon the traffic lanes. The interurbans ran on the southbound berm of Hamilton Avenue, both directions, impinging on the traffic lanes. Schiff, when he got control of it, moved both tracks to the center of the road. Thereafter, both companies, the interurbans and the streetcars, they ran northbound in the north lanes, southbound in the south lanes. Now, north of Hamilton, Hamilton, by the way, was a major heavy industrial city. North of Hamilton, we come to Middletown, steel mill town, home of the famous Middletown mule car. Middletown is on the east bank of the Maumee River. The B&O came up the west bank of the river. The New York Central came up just barely east of town. It hit what was then the east city limits of town to connect the two stations. The B&O built this in the 1800s, built this Cincinnati, Hamilton, and Dayton Traction Company. a horse car line to connect the two stations through town. It lasted. It was the last horse car line in the country. It lasted until it was replaced by a motor bus in 1918. It outlasted the line in New York City by about 11 months. Now, if you look closely, it's kind of hard to see here. The Ohio Electric is going from on north to south across the front of our view here. The mule car is running east and west. There were no frogs. How they worked it out is hard to know because the mule car was there first. When Ohio Electric built through, they bisected the car line, and one car ran from here east to the New York Central Station. Another car ran from here west to the B&O. 1913 flood that you're going to hear a lot about took out the river bridge, and thereafter the line only ran from here east to the New York Central Station. However, the car barn and the stables were west of Ohio Electric, so the pull-ins and pull-outs, the cars had to jump the Ohio Electric rails here. Now, this structure that you see in the background here, vaguely, that was a drawbridge over the Miami and Erie Canal. Remember, from Pomeroy Mandelbaum, grade level route right through the heart of all the communities along the line. Now, north of Middletown, we come to this interesting situation. The traction, the canal, the railroad, and the highway all, excuse me, ran on the bank of the Maumee River. Well, when the traction was the last comer here, got into it, there was no room. So what to do? Well, they built a trestle half a mile long in the river. This is a bend in the river. They built this trestle, 1896. They built this trestle in the river, long ways. And in 1898, it washed out. They replaced it. It was always a problem. When Schiff got involved, he somehow connived land on the bank of the river. He relocated his tracks over to the bank. Now, the New York Central, we have here we have here, after his relocation, of course, the canal, actually the canal is there. The New York Central is up here on the side of the bluff. It was a single track headache, nightmare in the middle of a double track main line. It was curving. It was subject to occasional flood damage. The New York Central in 1910 to 12 built a bypass of all of this west of the river to our left, crossed the river twice. Now, when they did that, Schiff was convinced that he was going to buy the old right-of-way and relocate his tracks up on the old New York Central tracks. Well, the New York Central didn't see it that way, and this side of the river trackage remained a nightmare, kept continually washing out in the river bend, even in C&LE days. Now, next came Franklin, which, if you've read Wagner's Two Ohio Trolleys, you know that the 11-mile Franklin-Lebanon Traction Company met Ohio Electric here. The builders thought they were going to sell it to Ohio Electric, but when the time came, Ohio Electric was broke. We're looking here at 6th Street at the Union Station here, which served both companies. Right behind the station is the single track car barn where they sheltered, where they kept both of their cars. The canal right there in the background, that's where the canal's running. Franklin Lebanon quit in 17. When that happened, the interurban station, the Union Station, was moved north to a storefront downtown. Now here we see Franklin had 2,000 residents. It had two New York Central stations, this one and another station on the other side of the canal, 2 blocks north. What really happened was the New York Central came through first, built their station up at 4th Street. Later came the Cincinnati Northern, the steam one. On the New York Central was on the east side of the canal. The Northern was on the west side of the canal. The canal was still in service. They couldn't conveniently built a bridge, so they had 2 stations up until the new New York Central bypass was opened. Now, north of that, we come to Chautauqua. You've all heard of the Chautauqua Societies with the William Jennings Bryan visits, the lectures, the revivals, the camping, and so forth. We are standing on the bluff looking down at, yes, the New York Central, the canal, the highway, and the traction. The way they built the traction through here was they put up a retaining wall, backfilled it, and put the tracks on top of the fill. Severe damage was done here in 1898 flood. In 1913, there was 6 feet of water down here, and this all washed out. The bridge here, the pedestrian bridge here, went down in 13. At the time, this track had been bypassed, and it was abandoned in 1912. New York Central had to come back and relay the tracks, use this as their shoe fly around the bypass on the west side of the river. And there's some anecdotal, some people around Miamisburg claim they had to renegotiate the right of way. Now here we are, the next town is Miamisburg, and once again, we're standing on the bluff. This loose dirt that we see here was part of the construction of that New York Central bypass. Looking down from the bluff, of course, we have the New York Central, the canal, the traction, and the highway. There's the river in the background. This bridge that we see here across the river was the way that Ohio Electric got to Germantown on the Germantown branch. Now here we are, close up, looking at the bridge. This is a Germantown car heading toward Dayton. Now, as soon as he reaches the, he's traveling eastbound on the bridge. As soon as he gets to the riverbank, he will be in Miamisburg. Now, Ohio Electric ran short turns to Miamisburg, and every 4th or 5th car went on to Germantown. Here we are in 1910. And here we are in 1913. The segment from Dayton down to Hamilton was destroyed or disappeared in the 1913 flood. That was that $1.5 million worth of damage that was mentioned earlier. From Dayton to Cincinnati, virtually every river crossing went down. The only way to cross the Maumee River was to wade, swim, or row. This brand new New York Central bypass, 2 bridges across the river, they both went down, and which is why they had to go back to the old right-of-way. This was by far the worst damage on the Ohio Electric system. All of the segments suffered damages. But this was the worst. 1/4 of the right-of-way disappeared or was damaged down here. Now, when Ohio Electric broke up, this is a segment in that portion that Schiff thought he was going to buy the New York Central right-of-way and bypass. But when Ohio Electric broke up, this is what Conway took over. This is the Ohio Electric main line right here. And 1918, and that's actually the Dixie Highway there that we're looking at. Now, you've all seen this photograph, and you probably have seen the Pathé newsreel of the Great Airplane Race. Do you realize, though, that this could not have happened before 1908? Not because the Wright brothers had not developed controlled flight, but the tracks weren't there. Building up to Ohio Electric, Schiff embarked on a program to replace this obsolete side-of-the-road trolley from Cincinnati to Dayton with a modern, high-speed, double-track electric railway, which he succeeded in accomplishing or grading all the way from Dayton down to Hamilton. Here we are in approximately the same location as the airplane race. In fact, this is the top of the hill where the airplane race actually started, on the brand new double track. Now, the original right-of-way here was 1/4 mile to the east. That would be to our right. We're looking north. That is a Miamisburg short-term car. They're headed north next to the work train. It was totally side of the road roller coaster before he undertook this improvement. Now, part of this improvement down just south of Middletown, he eliminated a 1 mile dog leg. He was going to cut an hour off of the transit time from Hamilton up to Dayton. Part of that was this segment. He eliminated a 1 mile dog leg, which had a low crossing of the river, constantly flooded out. He built this 500-foot long, 9-span plate girder bridge across the Maumee River. Now, it is, you'll notice, of course, single track, but look closely. The piers are poured for double track. The right-of-way, when the double track stopped, the right-of-way was all graded into Hamilton for double track. Here, this was actually completed and opened to service in 1912, as you see. And here we are in 1913, $1.5 million. Now, that bridge was never replaced. It was there was a temporary pile trestle put in, which survived until the end of the CNLE. It continued, though, to be a problem. The floodwaters washed those trestle bents, pushed them out of alignment. On the banks, the trestle bents were scoured and left unsupported. In the wintertime, ice flows pushed the bents out of alignment. Always a problem. Ohio Electric never recovered from that damage in the 1913 flood. Beyond that bridge, he again had to cross a tributary of the Maumee River. To do that, part of the problem was he had to cross the Pennsylvania Railroad. Now, the Pennsylvania Railroad objected to that. It went back to Andrew Carnegie, who got his start as a Pennsylvania executive. And in his autobiography, he tells us that it was our practice when we built into a new community to build our tracks along the waterfront and then refuse to allow Teamsters to cross it, thereby, because they couldn't get to the docks, we eliminated the water traffic as a competitor. Well, they carried over into the railroad days. The original right-of-way crossed in a public street, which got them across the Pennsylvania at grade. However, this new right-of-way, they got in a fight about how they're going to get across, grade crossing trestle. By the time they got it resolved in the courts of who's going to do what to who, they would split the cost of a big trestle, and Ohio Electric would maintain it. By the time that got through the courts, the Ohio Electric was broke, and this segment never got completed. Part of that great improvement was an electrical change. They had 7 little DC power plants. They built down at Hamilton this big, huge steam turbine AC power plant. Technology was rapidly changing for about 6 months. This was the largest steam turbine power plant in the world. Strangely, the boilers are on the ground floor. The machinery is on the second floor on 24-inch I-beams, concrete floor. This is a shortened version of the Spy Run plant of Indiana Service Company, which was another Randall Morgan proposition. When it was under and building this, they replaced their steam plants with substation. While it was being built, there was a problem. Tornado came through, and the roof, a concrete roof, part of it was not cured, part of it still was wet with the forms still in place. The concrete roof dropped down on the machinery, which was being installed with the open turbine stators, the open cases with turbine rotors sitting on the floor. $40,000 worth of damage in 1908, which Westinghouse had to eat. Since we're talking about inflation, these were the days of the 2-cent fare laws. 2 cents in 1908 would be 64 cents today. So a 54-mile trip from Dayton to Cincinnati in today's money would cost $35. Plus, The nickel car fare on each end would add a total of $3.20 to that trip. Can you imagine a public transit system today working on those kinds of fares? Now, moving into Dayton, right at the south edge of Dayton, we're sitting here in the middle of the vast Charles Kettering estate. You may remember Charlie, the self-starter, tetraethyl lead, Freon. The 1% lived down here. Now, this is something called the Hills and Dales Railway. Now, Dayton at the time, we're going to diverge a minute. Dayton at the time had two electric companies that wanted to merge. Iowa law prohibited that, but it would allow a streetcar system to buy all the electric companies in the world. So on March 23rd, 1911, the Hills and Dales Railway was incorporated. On April 13th, it was granted a railroad franchise to run a 3-mile line from out here at the Kettering Estate over to connect to meet Ohio Electric. On May 3rd, 1911, the name was changed to Dayton Power and Light. On June 16th, 1911, under the railroad charter, they purchased the Dayton Lighting Company and the Dayton Citizens Electric Company. Now, they haven't turned a spade of dirt yet. But now they've bought the two electric companies. Ohio Electric, when it was completed, Ohio Electric operated this line for them. Parts of it actually lasted until 1940 under different operators. Now in Dayton, there were 4 Ohio Electric lines came into Dayton. They all loaded in the street, different locations. Schiff, when he came in, bought this long wooden structure, storerooms, on the bank of the Miami and Erie Canal again. Post and beam construction. The walls didn't do anything but keep the weather out. So one storeroom there on the end, excuse me, he knocked down the walls, made that the shelter for cars that were loading in the street. The rest of the first floor became a waiting room. The second floor became offices. This was to be temporary. It lasted until the end of the CNLE. Now in Dayton, he did build a brand new freight house. In 1912, this opened up. A wonder of its day, a marvel of efficiency. The building still stands. When he did this, he also opened brand new passenger depots, brick stations in Springfield, Columbus, Lima, and Toledo. By the time it came Dayton's turn, Ohio Electric was broke. And all the Ohio Electric lines then loaded there at that wooden station building and CNLE eventually. Now let's look at something called the Indiana, Columbus, and Eastern, which in turn had a number of underlying companies itself. This was really the heart of the CNLE when you get right down to it. The first underlier of that system we'll look at is the Dayton and Western, which ran from Dayton to Richmond, Indiana with a branch. It was owned, yes, owned by Valentine Winters, the guy standing here in the bowler hat on the west side of Dayton. Actually, this was rural country then. It is now an urban slum. Valentine Winters, of course, of the Winters Bank, of the Dayton and Troy he owned, of the one of the Dayton streetcar lines he owned. He also was the grandfather of comedian Jonathan Winters. Now, the Dayton and Western was side of the road, which was not so bad because west of Dayton, the land is flat. The roads were straight. Perhaps not ideal, but not that bad, except this stretch here west of Eaton, Ohio. There's an Eaton, Indiana. West of Eaton, Ohio, the original pole line was there between the highway and the track. Well, when the Model T came along, there were a lot of unfortunate meetings between cars and the poles. So when the road was paved, the pole line was moved to the opposite side of the track. And the simple overhead was converted to catenary, one of the few such installations in the Midwest. Now, Dayton and Western crossed the Pennsylvania Railroad twice. Remember the antagonism of the Pennsylvania to the interurbans. And the Dayton and Western was forced to build 2 of these big, long, monstrous overpasses to accomplish their crossing. Ohio Electric ultimately was saddled with 5 of these things, plus the one down at Hamilton that we talked about earlier that never did get built or completed. Now, part of the Dayton and Western was a branch, a short-lived 3-mile branch that ran up to a resort hotel in New Paris. It passed through a New Westville. It was always a money pit. And when Ohio Electric broke up, the Dayton and Western was returned to Valentine Winters in 1920. Immediately, this line was abandoned. Now, we're next going to look at the Dayton and Union, Dayton and Muncie, a number of different names operated on from Dayton up to Union City, Indiana. Union City, Indiana and Ohio, the state line runs right down through the middle of town there. The Dayton and Western carried a lot of bridge traffic between Ohio and Indiana. The Dayton and Muncie connected up with the Indiana Union Traction Company, but it never did develop bridge traffic. It was just roundabout and out of the way. It spent its days plodding along as a local carrier. When Ohio Electric broke up and it was returned to the Indiana, Columbus, and Eastern, they did try to put some lightweight cars on it, but it was abandoned in 1925. Another one of their earlier cars. Farmland, no real major traffic generating cities. Now let's next look at the line from Dayton to Columbus. Via Springfield. Now there were a couple of branches going east out of Columbus to Dayton. The first thing you come to was the Huffman Prairie. That's where the Wright brothers developed their controlled flight. Ultimately, that became Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. It started during World War I as Wright Field, where the Wright brothers trained almost all of America's World War I pilots. And by the way, during World War I, Wright Company had 3 airplane factories in Dayton, all of them situated on Ohio Electric tracks. They were the largest airplane factory in the world during World War I. But out here at the base, as it's known, photography was prohibited, and Ohio Electric conductor surreptitiously, from the back platform of his freight motor, took a photograph of the base under construction. We next come to a place called Osborne. Now, during the 1913 flood, this was underwater. Partially underwater. As a result of that flood, Dayton built a huge flood control district. Excuse me. And this, what we see here, would have been under high water conditions, flooded. So the people of Osborne got together, jacked up every house in town, and moved the whole entire town over to an adjoining community of Fairfield. Which was out of the floodplain, renamed it Fairborn. And you go through Fairborn today, you can see where the houses changed. You can see where the Osborne houses were relocated into town. There was a branch up to a place called New Carlisle. Here we are in downtown New Carlisle. This was projected to go on north in the halcyon days of unlimited interurban enthusiasm. This is where it stopped. Just out of view to our left, it crossed a branch of the Mad River. There are 5 rivers that come together in Dayton. The Mad was one of them. That bridge went out, no surprise, in 13. The line out to New Carlisle was rebuilt up to the bridge. But after the flood, cars stopped on the other side of the bridge, and you had to walk into New Carlisle. This was abandoned when Ohio Electric broke up. The IC&E abandoned it in 1922, just 1 year after the breakup. Now, Springfield. Springfield, we mentioned earlier, had one city car that ran from the east city limits out to the Masonic home west of town. Here we are west of town. a huge park out there. It was a Stone and Webster City, 4-foot track gauge. The two companies never shared a street. This is Snyder Park. That embankment up there was then a double track Ohio Electric main line. It is now US 40. On the other side of Snyder Park, there was something called the Springfield, Troy, and Pickwill, which survived into the diesel days until 1960 as a diesel freight hauler, provided paper into the Collier publishing plant. Springfield was blessed with a brand new brick station and concourse. This was the corporate headquarters of Ohio Electric. And survived into the 90s. The building did. Now, east of Springfield, the line pretty much followed the national road. It branched out cross country in places. We're passing through a community called Harmony. It was not a Harmony Society community. It just happened to be named Harmony. It came to London. Now, the national road went straight across Ohio, east and west. It bypassed Dayton. It went through Columbus. It just went right straight across Ohio. It bypassed London. Now, when the underlier was built, the Columbus, London, and Springfield, they were following the national road. They came to Somerford. They did a dog leg down into London, snaked through town, came back up to the national road at Lafayette. In 1907, Schiff took over and immediately built this bypass up here. The limited trains then bypassed the dog leg, and only the local cars came down through London. Now, in London, there continued to be problems. That in red here was the original right-of-way. There were some problems with the city. Ohio Electric put in a bypass in 1913. Here we are downtown. Here's the bypass headed off to the right to the east. The station is, if I can find my arrow here, the station's right here. The freight house is right here. Here's the bypass going east. Coming into town is a long, steady grade, not really steep, but long and steady. 1919, there was a car came down the hill, got out of control, hit this curve here, and rolled over on its side, slid across the intersection and hit an iron utility pole. Of course, there's no strength in the roof or the sides of the car. The car penetrated the pole, or the pole penetrated the car, whichever you want to look at it, all the way to the floor. 11 people were injured, 5 people died in that one. Now, moving east, we come to West Jefferson, and this is in here because notice the station here. Ohio Electric was just filled with these stations, secondhand, repurposed buildings. If you wanted to project a progressive image, this just wasn't the way to do it. This is a national road right here. Came to be a 5-lane highway. East of West Jeff, moving into Columbus. This was flat land, but there was just west of Columbus, Big Darby Creek, really deep valley, if you will. Ohio Electric bridged it with this Big Darby trestle. This was a photograph point all the way up into the CNLE days. The original line through here, the Columbus, London, and Springfield, this is one of their cars. We think that's on the national road close to Springfield, but look at the trucks. Mounting brackets there for third rail beams. Now, out of Columbus to the south, the Scioto Valley did run a third rail interurban. East of Columbus, the Columbus and Newark and Zanesville, and apparently also the Columbus, London, and Springfield. They used short segments of 3-rail track. The third rail was used to activate their signals. hence the need for third rail beams and brackets. It didn't last long. Schiff and Columbus built a big new modern brick station. This one lasted into the modern days. But Dayton, by the time he got these built, he didn't have any money to finish off Dayton. Now, out of Columbus, they had something, they had a short Columbus Grove City and Southwestern was the underlier. The original plan, the promoters thought they were going to build all the way down to Cincinnati, and as far as they got was there to a place called Orient. Between Columbus and Cincinnati on a straight line is wonderful, rich farmland, but no major population centers. There are some county seats, but just not the kind of population density to support an interurban, and that's where they stalled. They lasted until through the Ohio Electric. That's their original car. They lasted through the collapse of Ohio Electric, and when it fell back to the Indiana, Columbus, and Eastern, it immediately in 1922 was abandoned. Now, north, let's go back to Springfield and head north up to Lima. Construction was done with steam trains, steam engines. First community going north is Urbana. It's a manufacturing center. It's a college town. Quite a prosperous area in the day, and really a major traffic generator. The heart of downtown Urbana here, the Confederate soldier is still up there on his pedestal, except the pedestal now is surrounded by a concrete retaining wall of multicolors. This happens to be the intersection of two major U.S. highways, and these long 53-foot trailers that we have on the roads today have a problem getting around it, and they keep scraping it and decorating it with their trailer colors. North of Urbana, going into West Liberty. West Liberty is a very small town. We cross the very source of the Mad River. The Mad River here, normally it's about 10 feet wide. You can wade across it, get your feet wet, never reach water up to your knee. But in 1913, there it is. The Mad River crossing is right down there is the bridge across the Mad. This is the kind of damage that Ohio Electric suffered all over its system. Now, downtown West Liberty, 1908, the presidential campaign, Jennings, Bryant versus Taft. We have somebody up here on an open platform, Ohio Electric car, campaigning. They had 6 of these. They were originally planned as parlor cars, but it never worked out. And ultimately, all 6 of them, the platforms were enclosed. Some of them became combines, some of them became coaches, but they all passed into ordinary service. Now, next comes Bell Fountain. We're standing on top of the courthouse. We're looking down at the main intersection in Bell Fountain. This was a railroad town. It was a county seat and a railroad town. As we said, it had that huge New York Central shops and yards west of town. They did have, as we said, a streetcar line, one car, north and south on the interurban tracks. Here he is sitting on the interurban tracks south of town. They also ran that car line east and west through town. We think now all the city cars were painted like this. We think that's maroon and light cream or white, because at the time the Cincinnati Street Railway was painted that way. But with these old black and white photographs, it's very, very difficult to really establish a color. Going on north into the community of New Hampshire, we see we see the standard substation in this track section up here. Cookie cutter design. They use them every place. They use the same set of drawings everywhere. New Hampshire had an elevator. The Ohio Electric was able to pull steam road cars down to service the elevator. Not a terribly large city. We are actually looking at what appears to be the entire male population of New Hampshire here trying to board the car. In Lima, now remember that Ohio Electric main line did not reach Lima until the spring of 1908. The segment from Lima to Fort Wayne, the Lima City cars, and the very beginning of the line to Toledo passed into Ohio Electric control about as an underlier. Schiff was championing that to merge into Ohio Electric when it was incorporated in 7. The early lines all used the West Ohio station, a storefront downtown just off the town square. Ohio Electric got into town in the spring of 8 and continued to use that storefront until this brand new station was opened in 1910. Building still stands, by the way. It was used exclusively by Ohio Electric until 1914. Here they are building it. They're putting up the platforms in the back until 1914, when the West Ohio began using the platforms. But for some reason, they established their own waiting room apart from the Ohio Electric station. The waiting room was right next to it. No explanation. Along with their purchase of the Lima Toledo, they got the Lima streetcar lines, which guaranteed him his access to the streets of Lima. He wanted to keep the West Ohio from getting control of the streetcar line and blocking him. We see a Lima car downtown on the town square in the what we think was the maroon and cream colors. That lasted until well past the end of the CNLE. Now, going north of town, go north on Main Street, we come to Grand Avenue. Now, at Grand Avenue, the Fort Wayne, Van Wert, and Lima started building a car barn here in 1905. When Schiff came to town, he took it over and enlarged it into this grandiose structure, an office structure, a car barn beside it. All of the Ohio Electric lines and the streetcars used this car barn. For a time, the Cincinnati Car Company had offices here in the building and apparently built a few cars over there in the bays. Now, here we are on Main Street. The Toledo and Lima cars moved north here on Main Street. The Fort Wayne cars headed west here on Grand Avenue, hence Grand Avenue Junction. Now we're going to look at the Lima Defiance line. This was built in the 1880s as a steam road. It was promoted as a way to get from Columbus to Saugatuck, Michigan. And they were going to haul Ohio coal up to Michigan and ferry it across the lake to Milwaukee. The only portion that ever got built was this segment from Lima to Defiance. Schiff Ohio Electric took it over. In 1909, he electrified it. Never a money winner. It operated with 2 cars. They built a couple of attempts at homemade electric locomotives to provide the freight traffic electrically. Remember, this was a steam road, and they had steam road interchange, and they were admitted to the steam road tariffs. But there never was any significant business along the line. When Ohio Electric collapsed in 1921, this existed for a couple of years. In 1923, some local guys took it over, tore down the overhead, and operated with a gas electric car until 1929. To say it was prosperous was not even charitable. The Defiance waiting room. This is the Defiance waiting room. In fact, they interchanged with the B&O at Lima and Defiance. There's no bridge traffic, no nothing. Now, on the other hand, the Fort Wayne Van Wert Lima, this was a profitable bridge line. It connected Northern Ohio and Michigan with the Indiana lines. It was completed in 1905, immediately leased by the Lima Toledo. Even though the Lima Toledo wasn't completed, they leased it. Schiff probably had his hand in that. Now, west of Lima, it paralleled, actually side by side, with the Pennsylvania Railroad all the way through Ohio. In Indiana, it struck off cross country. This is, of course, 1913. The damage, of course, is the Pennsylvania, but the Ohio Electric over there on the left is still flooded out. Now, they had crossed the Pennsylvania twice, and here we go across the Pennsylvania again. They had two of these monstrous overhead trestles. Now, here we are. They basically followed the Lincoln Highway. The Lincoln Highway and the Pennsylvania Railroad and the traction, they're all more or less together, not always side by side like the traction and the Pennsylvania were, but the Lincoln Highway always lurked in the background. Here we are in Zulu, Indiana. A big, one of the typical Cincinnati combines with which the lines started, stopping to pick up passengers. There's a sister of that car in Monroeville, Indiana. In the very background there, there is one of the 5 substations of the line. This was a very profitable bridge line. And when Ohio Electric broke up, it operated for a few months on its own. It went into bankruptcy. Indiana Service Company took it over as the trustee and operated it until the end. Now let's look at the Lima to Toledo segment. Constructed, of course, with steam engines. They had this monstrous wreck near Deschler. One construction train rear-ended another, with one man lost his life. Now, this is flat land up here. At one time, Lake Erie reached all the way, in prehistoric times, the Lake Erie reached almost all the way to Fort Wayne. The land up here is dead flat, swampland. Here we see a car racing southbound toward Lima. I can't identify, unfortunately, the photograph cut off the city name on the water tower. Land up here all is tiled. There are a few waterways near Ottawa. They crossed the that would be the Blanchard River at Ottawa. Here we go with the standard substations again. This is Leipzig. That's standard substation design. This one has a passenger depot built onto the front of it. Leipzig had a photographer that just loved to make postcards of this. Deschler, a meet there at Deschler. Now, to get into Toledo, the original plan was to use the Maumee Valley Traction Company, which ran alongside the Maumee River. That would take them over to the Toledo Bowling Green and Southern. Now, the TDG&S was a project of the Palmer and Mandelbaum people. Schiff could not come to terms with them, could not make that agreement, which is probably a good thing, because the Maumee Valley was built right on the banks of the Maumee River. And every spring it was underwater. Every winter it suffered from ice jams. In fact, in 1913, after the flood, it was abandoned, totally abandoned. One of the very first abandonments in the Ohio system. Since he couldn't gain permission to use that, fortunately, he built this long 1,000-foot viaduct, Tontogany Viaduct, across the Maumee River. A wonder of its day, a scenic wonder, even to today. It always shows up on postcards, views of Northern Ohio. This was when the CNLE used it. When they quit, it became a highway bridge. It's been out of service now for a number of years. It's deteriorating. The state of Ohio owns it. They will sell it to you for $100 if you will repair it. They figured the cost is about $1 million. Now, from here into Toledo, they ran on the banks of, here we go again, the Miami and Erie Canal on the berm. We are here south of Toledo at the Wabash Railroad crossing, looking north. Now, as you get into Toledo, they crossed a tributary of the Maumee River, which the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers determined was navigable. So they were forced to build a drawbridge across this so-called navigable waterway. We know that it was never used in the CNLE days. And the anecdotal history says that under Ohio Electric Service, it was never opened. However, they had to have it. Now, when they got into Toledo, right on the outskirts of downtown, they had private right-of-way all the way into town. Did not have to use the streets until they actually got right to the edge of downtown. Schiff there built a brand new station and freight house. Looking at it from the other side, this was the northern terminus. They did not actually run downtown. Now, when Conway came along, he ran his cars through down. He bypassed this and ran his passenger cars. This stayed in the freight house. Ran his passenger cars downtown to the Toledo Union Station. It was a storefront, and on into Detroit. But Ohio Electric always stopped here. Okay, now let's go east. Let's look at the segment from Columbus east. The Columbus, Newark, and Zanesville had some branches. It primarily followed the National Road. Here we are crossing the Big Walnut Creek with the road. Just actually, it's inside the Columbus city limits today. Side of the road most of the way. And this intrigues me because, of course, we see here the milk platform for the farmer here. The farmer here has built a wooden walkway, wooden sidewalk down to meet the cars. So typical of the early interurban, and of course the highway over there. We passed through a place called Etna. This is the National Road in Etna, 5-lane US 40 until the interstate highway bypassed it. And I just love here the Hotel Walker over here. If I can find my arrow, which I cannot, but the Hotel Walker over here on the left is advertising hay, feed, and stable along with your room. Going on east, they passed at Hebron area, they passed through some gas fields. Now the gas wells, they owned a gas field there. The gas was used to fire the boilers at the Hebron power plant. I cannot explain the trestle up there, the coal trestle leading up, but the principal fuel here at the Hebron power plant was natural gas from their own gas field. Hebron was the junction of the branch down to Buckeye Lake. Buckeye Lake started off as a feeder lake for the Ohio and Erie Canal. Ohio was crisscrossed with canals. It developed into a resort lake, camping, fishing, and things like that. Ohio Electric owned a big amusement park there on the lake. And here in Hebron is where the Buckeye Lake cars, both through and shuttle, met the main line. We are standing here in the National Road looking east in downtown Hebron. Now, that map we showed you earlier and said this is a Rand McNally railroad map. It doesn't exactly truthful. At Hebron, the line took a huge loop through the country going north, and actually coming back down south before it went into Zanesville. Here in Hebron, the National Road is continuing. The National Road is continuing east. The Buckeye Lake branch is coming here and turning south to go down to Buckeye Lake. The main line is coming here, crossing over here behind the station and heading north to start into that big loop. Now, the Buckeye Lake branch terminated at Buckeye Lake. Here we have a 2-car train waiting at the park entrance. We talked about how it became an amusement park and popular retreat. I cannot imagine these big, long excursion cars. This one's a trailer, trying to get those big, long excursion cars around city curves, but they did it. Going on east, going into Newark, or as the locals say, Newark, we cross Raccoon Creek on this long but low trestle. We have a car coming off the trestle. Now this one's powered. This is another one of those excursion cars, but it's powered. It just blows me away that they ran those things through the city streets. Now, the interurban trestles, the interurban right-of-way altogether was not built to steam road standards because the cars were lighter. They didn't have to support locomotives. But in 1929, when the line was abandoned, the wrecker tried to move a loaded gondola car loaded with rails, scrap rails across that trestle with not very happy results. Coming into Newark. Newark is a county seat. Everything in Newark, the courthouse square sits in the middle of all the streets going to downtown Newark, and you have to come to the square and then jog around it. The courthouse is on our right. There are some early streetcars operating downtown Newark. Ohio Electric controlled this, owned this. IC&E owned the streetcar system here. Ohio Electric didn't, IC&E did. But they operated, again, these Ohio Electric city cars. As we say, we think that's maroon and cream. Another car out at the Greenwood Cemetery in town there. Cemeteries, of course, were a big traffic generator in the day. We see a Newark City car here, followed by an interurban car. Both of them are run as specials. A photographer had it. This is an early Photoshop. This is a 1910 Photoshop. There are several photographs of this scene from different perspectives, but it's always the same train crews in the same poses, just in different locations. So we know that they cut out the train crews and photographed the photograph. Downtown on the courthouse square, we see a limited train for Columbus loading there on the courthouse square. Now, Newark was the home of the Jewett Car Works. Now, Ohio Electric never bought from Jewett, of course, because they owned the Cincinnati Car Company. Some of the underliers did, but after 1907, the business all went to Cincinnati. These buildings still stand. Now, in the late 70s, fellow that I know was down there, and he tells me that all the records, all the photographs were still up in the attic there. But the mice had been into them. They quit about I think about 1918 or so. The mice had been up there all those 50 years and turned everything into confetti. However, if you're ever in the area, Newark has a museum downtown in a factory building. It's dedicated to the industrial history of Newark. They have one entire floor filled with artifacts and ephemera, photographs and drawings that were salvaged from that mouse infested attic. You simply must drop down into Newark to see that. They also have a Lakeshore Electric Jewett car, one of the flexible flyers there, stuffed and mounted. But the Jewett Car Works floor there in the museum, you have to stop and see it. Now, from Newark up to Granville, Granville was the home of Denison University. That's what we folks in Ohio consider to be the Newark and Granville, the first true interurban. Fell into Ohio Electric control. Here we are in downtown Granville, some kind of, probably a college something. Can't explain why the interurban car is bumped up front nose to the freight car. Ohio Electric never pulled freight cars with its passenger cars, and certainly wouldn't put one in front of it. One Ohio did, the Cincinnati and Columbus at the end, was pulling freight cars with its interurbans, but never Ohio Electric. Here we are in Granville, another one of the Newark and Granville cars. The Granville station, you know, these Ohio Electric stations were nothing to write home about. And here we are in a college town where it comes to be semester change. You're going to have all kinds of passengers loading. You'd think they'd have something to be proud of. No, typical of Ohio Electric. Now going on east, we come to something called the Blackhand Gorge. The B&O Railroad is over here on the south bank. This is the Licking River. For a time, there was a dam downstream here, which made this backwater. The Ohio and Erie Canal came in here. The canal boats were towed down through here with animal power, and before they went back to the dugout canal. Ohio Electric snuck through here on the edge of the bluff. Sometimes pretty precariously. In fact, at one point, they came through the Blackhand Tunnel. The tunnel is still accessible. It's now an Ohio Park area. It's interesting to walk back through there. In the day, up here on top of the bluff was a huge picnic ground. There were wooden stair steps going up there. It generated a lot of recreational traffic for Ohio Electric out of Columbus and also, of course, Newark and Zanesville. Now, coming into Zanesville, Ohio Electric came along the south side. This would be the, if I can find my arrow, there we go. This would be the, wait a minute, there we go. This would be the Muskingum River coming down, turning a right angle corner down to the Ohio River. This would be the Licking River coming into town. Ohio Electric came in on the south side of Licking, turned across the famous Y Bridge and went into town on Main Street. 1900, before the Ohio Electric days, we got to see this. The original Y Bridge here was rebuilt. There were two streetcar lines. Ohio Electric ran the streetcars in Zanesville. The streetcar line, one came across the Y Bridge, actually came across the Y Bridge and split and went in two directions. Downstream, there was another line came across the Muskingum, but the lines on the south side did not connect. Now this line up here, there were ways to get around and continue and get into town from over here. From down here in the south west corner, that was the only way across. So while they were rebuilding the bridge, they carved a bypass along the bluff and operated this way during the construction, single track. In Zanesville, this was known as the Zanesville Scenic Railway. We said, as we mentioned, Ohio Electric ran the streetcars there. Going in Main Street. This is 3rd and Main. Again, 1913 flood damage. 3 more blocks continuing on east 3 more blocks, we come to the Ohio Electric Station, which was a storefront at the corner of 6th and Main. And here we have a Columbus bound car, a local car. You'll notice that he is signed for Buckeye Lake. So he's going to run over and to Hebron, run the dog leg down to Buckeye Lake, come back over, and then head into Columbus, which the limited cars did not. He is blockading the city car behind him. Well, now let's jump ahead. We've now traversed the entire system. Let's jump ahead to February 15th, 1929. We're looking at Ohio Electric 166. It is now operated by Southern Ohio Public Service. He is getting ready to leave on the last run out of Zanesville to Columbus. The Cincinnati to Dayton line has just been assumed by Thomas Conway. The line from Lima to Dayton and Dayton to Springfield and Columbus is operating as the independent IC&E, soon to be absorbed by Conway. The Lima Toledo is all that remains of Ohio Electric, operating as the Lima Toledo Railroad. The now independent Dayton to Richmond segment is about to be placed in receivership, supervised by the CNLE and later by the Indiana Railroad. The Fort Wayne Lima line is now operated in its bankruptcy by the Indiana Service Corporation. Now, in the background, you see that single truck curbside car back there, a city car in Zanesville. One of the Kuhlman built curbsides that were subject to a patent infringement suit by the shell of what was left of the Cincinnati Car Company. So now that we've traversed the entire system, let us leave those thrilling days of yesteryear when interurbans crossed the country and return to our modern world. And that's the end of what we have to show here. And let's see now if I can find my arrow. Let me see here. Let me get out of this and let me come down to, uh-oh.
Do you need help, Bill?
Yes, I have lost the Zoom here.
Was that your last slide?
That was my last slide.
Oh, perfect. Well, I'll go ahead and switch over to mine then. And we'll let everybody unmute themselves in just a second. Did you have anything else before I switch over to my screen?
No, I am. If anybody's got a question, I'm ready to give it a shot.
Perfect. Yeah, there were a couple that came
Actually,
up.
this went faster than it was. This went faster than it was timed to be. That always happens when I do these programs. Okay, here we go.
Oh yeah, Well, we will
share
get
screen.
to.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I got it here. We'll get to questions in just a second. Because I know there probably are some. I personally found that Y bridge fascinating. But before everybody gets offline for the evening, oops, Bill, I'm going to share my screen here. Before we get offline for the evening, I want everybody to know what's coming up. We've got one last Trolleyology this year. Philadelphia Subway Surface Trolley Lines from Matt Nahn and Harry Donahue. This will be their, third or fourth Trolleyology program. So that'll be coming up in December. And then I don't have the schedule online just yet for next January, but we for sure have one. It'll be about the Super Saturday streetcar trips just before the Super Bowl from Steve Barry. So I'll get that up shortly and you'll be able to register for it about the week before the program, and I'll send out an update like I normally do. And also I forgot to mention Santa Trolley, our biggest event of the year, is coming up soon. So if you are one of our volunteers and want to help with that, you know who to reach out to. That's me. And if you want to come visit with the family or some grandkids, it's a great time. It's going to be super busy. We're selling out of some time slots already. So patrolley.org, you'll be able to find tickets to that. And again, I want to thank everybody for coming today. Thanks for joining us as always for these programs. And thank you especially to those of you who donated tonight during the registration process. I think last I checked, we had over $150 raised just from tonight's program. So thank you to Bill and thank you to those of you who donated. Now I do want to get to questions. So let me make it here so everybody can unmute themselves and feel free to turn on your videos as well. Okay, so I've checked the box that says allow participants to unmute themselves. Let's see. Oh, we're getting lots of nice comments in the chat here, Bill. Ed Scuchus says, did you get the Ohio Electric photos from Reed Prue? Do you know where they are?
No, I did not get the photos from Reed Prue. Some of them came from Dave Orsey, some of them came from Cliff Scholes, some of them I have collected myself. I do have a copy of Reed Prue's roster of Ohio Electric. There's an effort being made has asked you to start my video.
There you
go. Okay, am I where
yes.
I need to be, Kristen? Yes. There's an effort being made by some local people to put a huge collection of photographs into the into Carillon Park, and the fight there is over one, finding an appropriate location to store them, and two, guaranteeing that they will be accessible without exorbitant fees to people who would be interested.
Sure. Yeah, and if anyone here has not been to Carillon Park, I was just there last week. It's amazing. Lots of transportation history there too. There was another question. Was the Y Bridge destroyed by the 1913 flood?
No.
Oh. How long was it there? Or did you say that already? I might have missed it.
Well, actually it is still there. I'm not sure that it is the same one that was put up in 1900, but the Y Bridge is still a very big deal down in Zanesville.
Wow. Lots of nice comments. Another question. Is there a way to get a copy of the Ohio Electric roster?
If you will send me an email, and I don't know how to accomplish that, Kristen, you'll have to set that up.
Yes.
If you pay for the copying and the postage, I will send you one.
Do you have a digital version?
Well, no, that's a good point. I could create a digital version. Yes.
Okay.
I do not have one. It's I tell you what, it is
Ed Scuchus, if you want, you can send me an email.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. It's it's about 30 pages long.
Oh wow. Okay, yeah.
Yes, I can. No, it's actually it's well, yes, I can create a digital version. It's 15 pages long. I can create a digital version, and I guess and that can be sent email.
Yeah, no rush.
If you can get me the addresses, I will.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for being open.
It will take some time now. It's not going to happen next week.
Okay. All right. And then let's see. Joe Workany says, great show, one of your very best presentations, which reminds me that Bill actually does have a number of presentations. A lot of them are more, like this is one of the more generic ones. A lot of them are more specific to particular routes or operations. And right now, Bill, I'm inviting you back to do another one. So we'll do that. We'll get that on the schedule at some point if you are willing. Some other folks are, let's see. Oh, Bob Frank says the current Y Bridge was built in 1984. And the previous one was 1902. So update on that bridge. Let's see.
So the Zanesville Scenic Railway then was in 1902,
Yeah.
which of course was before Ohio Electric took over that line, but was worth throwing in.
Let's see. Okay, I stopped the share so we can see everybody here. And you should be able to unmute yourself. So if you have a question that you'd like to ask or a comment you'd like to make, feel free to unmute yourselves. You can find that button in the bottom left of your screen if you wiggle your mouse. Any comments or questions? George, I see you're unmuted. Did you have a question?
No.
Oh,
Bill?
okay.
Bill Charles Bogart here. Over at
Gosh, did I bore everybody or overload you?
No, I think it was very thorough. It looks like Charles Bogart has a question.
Were they still running steamboats up to Zanesville in 1900 when the interurbans were getting there? Because here in
Oh,
Kentucky,
yes, absolutely.
We had
And they were
interurbans
still running
connecting with the
steamboats up
steamboat.
there until, I think I'm correct in saying this because my wife is from the area. I think I'm correct in saying that until the 1930s. And in fact, there was a lock and dam at, doggone it, I can't think of the name of the town right now, which survived until, the 50s.
'Cause
And they
one
do
of
run an excursion boat in the Zanesville pool today.
Okay.
But of course, it
Bill?
can't reach the river.
Bill, did the Ohio Electric do a lot of freight business? I know they had freight motors and freight trailers.
Yes, they did freight business. I couldn't tell you couldn't define to you the extent of it. But I do know that they ran freight a freight business. Apparently it was not to the extent of the CNLE, but they did run a freight business.
Thank you
The Cincinnati
for the presentation.
the Cincinnati Car Company built quite a number of freight motors and also freight trailers for Ohio Electric and its operating units. Those, of course, carried over to CNLE days. I wanted to make one comment. Excuse the hoarse voice. I've been coming back from the flu here.
We're all doing that.
Oh, Kesley Chef used the inducement of a new station as a way to extend franchises that originally had been extended for only just a very few years to the interurban lines that he had purchased. So Springfield in particular and Lima were inducements to those communities to get their commissioners to extend the franchises so he could make the thing work. Otherwise, in the middle of the life of the Ohio Electric, they could have lost the franchise for operation in some of these cities. Big problem in Dayton was the reality that the commissioners of the city of Dayton didn't want to work with the interurban railroads to come up with a station. Finally, when they saw the light, like in 1910, 1912, as Bill said, there was no money left to build the station in Dayton, Ohio.
Thank you, Bill. I forgot to pop in with some comments back when you were talking about the horse car lines. A couple of our volunteers noted that there was a Pittsburgh Sarah Street horse car line that lasted until 1923.
Oh, I was not aware of that.
Yeah.
So that's one of the values of the Trolleyology series. You learn.
Yeah.
It was down in the south side, and the streetcar line was on Carson Street, or East Carson Street to be particular. One block up was the parallel Sarah Street, and I suspect the horse car line was kept there long enough, to stymie anybody else trying to build a competing line. Finally, the horse car driver decided to retire, and the rest is history.
And then there was a question from Ray about how the 1913 flood in Dayton compared to Ray, I assume you mean the 1936 flood in Pittsburgh, right? The St. Patrick's Day.
Yes. Because
Yeah.
we're all familiar with, how 36 devastated our area, and it just seems like 13 might have even been worse.
The 1913 flood impacted Ohio severely and Indiana. It primarily impacted the upland areas. In Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana, it is the 1937 flood of the Ohio River that severely impacted society. Financially, in terms of relative proportion to the economy at the time, the 37 flood, although it just devastated the Ohio Valley, really didn't do the damage that the 13 flood did. And I can't compare that to 36 in Pittsburgh because I'm not familiar with Pittsburgh. The 13 flood here in Ohio spurred the creation of something called the Miami Conservancy District, which built 5 dams and a number of river relocations. It was the prototype for the Tennessee Valley Authority, and one of the engineers that really created the system here went down to start the TVA. In terms of overall impact on the economy and lives, I would argue that the 13 flood was more severe than the 37 flood, although the 37 flood just wiped out the valley. And I can't compare that to Pittsburgh in 36.
There's
Don't
also
know.
a 1936 flood here in Washington, D.C., which was a major flood.
The early flood in the Dayton area, that was more of a flash flood type with swift moving water. Whereas the 37 flood on the Ohio River is a gradual rise that keeps rising and rising and going down. So you don't have the water washing stuff away. As if you look at the pictures, as you saw the pictures he showed, the water's washed things away. It's a flash flood coming down out of there, sweeping stuff away. 2 different floods types of water moving.
13 was a result of an unprecedented 100-year rainstorm.
I would compare it to the flooding in eastern Kentucky early this year, where it just came in and dumped in one spot and the rivers just moved like crazy. Or the one up in the Pennsylvania area 27, 30 years ago, they took out the Lockwater Railroad, if I remember correctly, washed the track and everything out.
That was Hurricane Diane in 1955, and it took everything out in the Poconos from Stroudsburg almost down into Scranton. And really caused all the financial havoc that would force them to merge with the Erie Railroad in 1962.
If I could add a word of thanks to Bill in the Cincinnati area, we're fortunate to have him nearby, and from time to time our local group, which is pretty well organized, a number of rail fans, enjoy an evening with Bill and his never-ending, expanding collection of photographs. It's always a delight to, sometimes over the years, 6, 8 years will go by and he'll do the same show he did back then, and he's added to the collection, so no two are ever alike. And couple that with his seemingly encyclopedic knowledge, it's always a wonderful evening. And big thank you, Bill, from all of us here in Cincinnati.
Yes, and if you have not been attending the Cincinnati Transit Historical Association Zooms, I definitely encourage you to check that out. Bill, Bill Myers, do you know the website off the top of your head?
I think it is quite simply ctha.org, Cincinnati Transit Historical Association, and we meet on the 3rd Saturday, 7 p.m. of each month.
And they're unique because they meet in person and on Zoom. Well, I guess it's not unique anymore, but one of the few groups that does that. So yeah, they always have something interesting going on. So check those out.
You actually need to join our organization because we put out one of the best newsletters in the whole wide world. It's always on Cincinnati Transit. But if you want to learn about Cincinnati Transit, join us.
I like to support all the other organizations, especially when you guys send us presenters and we all share presenters and you know, we have some overlap sometimes. So I think it's nice to let everybody else know who's out there. And I know there's a couple people who keep like a running list of who's presenting where as well. And I know at the start of the pandemic, you could probably still too, you could be on Zoom every night of the week and still not see everything that's out there online with all the rail organizations that are broadcasting. So we're doing our part to add to the continuing education, I guess, that's out there. And I want to thank Bill Van Doren for presenting tonight. And I hope we have him back again in the future for another program, Ohio related, although he has some programs that cross into Indiana as well, right?
Well, the Fort Wayne Lima is a pet of mine.
Yes, I guess that's what I was thinking of. So we'll keep everybody updated on that. Do we have any other comments or questions for Bill tonight? All right. Hearing none, I think we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you guys again for joining us tonight for another program in our Trolleyology series. Thank you especially to those of you who donated. And remember, if you have an idea for a presentation or if you have one lined up ready to go right now, please reach out to me at the email address that you received your confirmation email at. It's assistant@patrolley.org. And I hope you join us next time.